Sammy, talk to us about, and this is how we actually got to this webinar, is you wrote a really interesting article on Law 360. It got a lot of attention on Law 360. I actually became aware of it when it was reposted on LinkedIn and got something like 100 comments. So talk to us a little bit about what are the potential defenses from your point of view as an accomplished trial lawyer and criminal defense lawyer that people need to think about or might come into play in cases which may not be as egregious as the guy from Florida last week?
Yeah, so there's definitely some cases coming down the pipeline that I anticipate will be less egregious than what we've seen so far. And I think it was pretty obvious that at the beginning the government was going to be targeting the low-hanging fruit, like the cases that you're talking about. But in the future, certainly there's going to be cases coming down where, let's say, someone said that they had 25 employees when they had 20, which is the example I gave earlier. That's something that is a relatively minor mistake if the money could be repaid. But there's other instances where, let's say, someone takes out $1 million loan and they use a significant amount of the money legitimately, but then they use a certain amount of the money illegitimately. And the decision to prosecute a case like that is going to be on a case-by-case basis. It's going to be very fact-specific. So, for example, I mean, let's say you took out $1 million, you spent $800,000 on payroll, and then you spent $200,000 on things that you're not supposed to use. Under the traditional rules of fraud, the loss amount would be the amount essentially that you tried to take out as a loan. It would be the amount that you intended to deceive someone. And the loss amount would be the entire amount of the loan that you took out. Now, there was a new Eighth Circuit decision in 2020 that came down talking about legitimate versus illegitimate uses of the money and how that can mitigate the loss amount and therefore reduce the amount of jail time that you would be looking at. So I think that would be definitely a certain defense that I see being applicable in cases that are coming down the pipeline. But it's really going to depend on what percentage of the money was used legitimately and illegitimately. So, for example, if someone takes out $1 million loan and they use $200,000 on payroll, but $800,000 illegitimately, and let's assume the $800,000 was used first, and then the $200,000 was used after the fact, then the government would have a stronger argument to suggest that they should be responsible for the entire amount because the intent at the time of the loan was fraudulent, and he just happened to use $200,000 legitimately. Now, whether or not they pursue that type of whether they're that aggressive will yet to be seen, but they would have a good argument to suggest that he should be responsible for the entire amount rather than just the amount that he used illegitimately. So it's really going to be fact specific and depending on what the amounts are.